The forbidden connection. The crystal sanctum stood like a monument to eternity itself, its translucent walls catching the light of 3 suns and casting rainbow patterns across the polished floors. Within its sacred halls, Zara moved with the fluid grace of someone who had perfected every gesture over the course of a millennium. Her silver hair flowed like liquid starlight, and her violet eyes held depths that spoke of centuries spent in meditation and service. For 1,000 years, she had served as High Guardian of the Valyrian spiritual order, maintaining the sacred vow that bound her to solitude and celibacy. Her people believed that such dedication channeled pure spiritual energy, allowing her to commune with the cosmic forces that governed their world. The vow was more than tradition. It was the foundation of her very existence. The morning meditation had proceeded as it had for countless centuries, with Zara kneeling before the great crystal that formed the heart of the sanctum. The massive gem pulsed with inner light, responding to her presence with gentle harmonics that filled the chamber. She had felt the familiar peace settling over her mind when the communication device chimed with an urgent message. "High Guardian," came the voice of Minister Kellen, his tone carrying unprecedented urgency. "The humans have arrived. Their diplomatic vessel requests permission to land and present their proposal for alliance." Zara's meditation faltered for the first time in decades. The humans were a young species, barely having achieved interstellar travel, yet they had managed to locate Valeria despite the protective barriers that had hidden their world for millennia. Their arrival had been prophesied in the ancient texts, though none had expected it to happen during her lifetime. "Grant them permission," she replied, her voice carrying the melodic quality that marked her as one of the chosen. "I will receive a representative in the Hall of Convergence." The Hall of Convergence was the most sacred space in the sanctum, where the spiritual energies of the planet converged into a single focal point. It was here that the most important ceremonies took place and where visitors were received when matters of cosmic significance were at stake. Zara had prepared the chamber with careful attention to protocol, arranging the traditional offerings and ensuring that the crystal formations were aligned to create the proper harmonic resonance. She had expected a delegation of dignitaries, perhaps accompanied by scholars and military advisors, as was common among the younger species. Instead, a single human walked through the chamber doors, and Zara felt something shift in the very fabric of reality around them. Commander Jake Morrison stood just over 6 feet tall, his dark hair showing touches of gray that spoke of experience rather than age. His blue eyes held a mixture of determination and genuine curiosity as he took in the magnificent architecture of the hall. He wore the simple uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, but there was something about his bearing that suggested he was more than just a career diplomat. "High Guardian Zara," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to resonate with the crystal formations around them. "I am Commander Jake Morrison, representing the United Earth Alliance. I come seeking understanding between our peoples." The moment he spoke her name, Zara felt a tremor run through her carefully maintained composure. No outsider had ever made the crystal formations respond to their presence, yet the entire chamber seemed to hum with energy at the sound of his voice. She studied his face, noting the lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow, the eyes that held depths she had not expected from such a young species. "You are welcome in this sacred place, Commander Morrison," she replied, her voice maintaining its ceremonial tone, despite the chaos beginning to unfold in her mind. "It is rare for the crystals to respond to an off-world visitor. Perhaps you carry within you something that resonates with the cosmic forces." Jake stepped closer, his movements careful and respectful as he approached the central dais where she stood. "I've always felt a connection to things beyond the physical world. My people call it intuition, but I suspect it's something more. When I volunteered for this mission, I felt called to come here, as if something was drawing me across the stars. The honesty in his words struck her like a physical blow. For centuries, she had listened to the empty platitudes of politicians and the calculated words of those seeking favor. But this human spoke with a sincerity that seemed to bypass her mental defenses entirely. She found herself studying the way he moved, the way he seemed to instinctively respect the sacred space without being told the proper protocols. "Tell me of your world," she said, gesturing for him to sit on the meditation cushion that had been prepared for visitors. "What drives humanity to seek the stars?" Jake settled onto the cushion with surprising grace, his posture naturally falling into a position that complemented the chamber's energy flows. "We're driven by curiosity, by the need to understand our place in the universe. But more than that, we're driven by hope. Hope that somewhere among the stars we'll find others who share our dreams of peace and cooperation." His words painted pictures in her mind of a blue world where billions of humans lived, loved, and dreamed of touching the stars. She saw images of their cities, their art, their music, and their endless capacity for both creation and destruction. The visions came not from her own imagination, but seemed to flow directly from his consciousness to hers. "Your thoughts are very clear," she observed, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "It is unusual for non-Valyrians to project with such clarity." "I'm not trying to project anything," Jake replied, his brow furrowing in concentration. "But I can sense something. From you as well. Images of this world, of ceremonies that stretch back through time, of a dedication that I can barely comprehend." The connection between them was growing stronger by the moment, and Zara felt the first cracks appearing in the mental barriers she had maintained for a millennium. She had been trained to resist such intrusions, to maintain the sacred isolation. That preserved her power. But Jake's presence wasn't intrusive. It was like finding a missing piece of herself she had never known was absent. "The vow I have taken requires absolute dedication," she said, her voice becoming softer, more personal. "For 1,000 years, I have lived in isolation, channeling my energy into service to my people. It is a sacred trust that cannot be broken." "But at what cost?" Jake asked, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What is the value of spiritual power if it requires you to deny the very connections that make life meaningful?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge to everything she had believed. Zara had never questioned the wisdom of her vow, had never considered that there might be other paths to spiritual enlightenment. But looking into Jake's eyes, she saw a depth of understanding that rivaled her own, achieved not through isolation, but through connection with others. Asterisk. "You do not understand the magnitude of what you suggest," she said, though her voice lacked the conviction she had expected. "My vow is not merely personal. It maintains the spiritual balance of this entire world. If I were to break it, the consequences could be catastrophic." Jake leaned forward, his presence filling the space between them with warmth and possibility. "Or perhaps the consequences of maintaining it are what's truly catastrophic. How many opportunities for growth and understanding have been lost because of fear of change?" The challenge in his words sparked something within her that she had thought long dormant. For the first time in centuries, she felt the stirring of emotions that had nothing to do with duty or spiritual service. She felt curiosity, attraction, and something that might have been longing for the simple human connections she had denied herself. "You speak of things you cannot understand," she said, rising from her meditation position with fluid grace. "The path I have chosen is not one of denial, but of transformation. Through my sacrifice, I have gained abilities that allow me to serve my people in ways that would be impossible if I were bound by earthly attachments." Jake rose as well, his movements mirroring hers with unconscious synchronization. "But what if earthly attachments aren't limitations? What if they're the very things that make spiritual growth possible? Before she could respond, he reached out with one hand, not touching her, but simply extending the gesture of connection. The space between his palm and hers seemed to crackle with energy, and Zara felt the crystal formations around them responding to their combined presence in ways she had never experienced. "I can feel your power," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "It's incredible, like nothing I've ever encountered. But I can also feel the loneliness, the isolation, the parts of yourself that you've had to sacrifice to maintain." The accuracy of his perception shattered her composure completely. For the first time in a millennium, tears formed in her violet eyes as she confronted the truth she had been hiding from herself. The power she had gained through her vow was real, but so was the cost, and until this moment she had convinced herself that the price was worth paying. "You should not be able to sense such things," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotions she could no longer suppress. "No one has ever been able to see through the barriers I have constructed." "Maybe that's because I'm not trying to see through them," Jake replied, his hand moving fractionally closer to hers. "Maybe I'm just trying to understand them, to understand you." The distinction seemed small, but it struck her with the force of revelation. Every other being who had attempted to connect with her had been trying to take something, to breach her. Defenses for their own purposes. But Jake was offering something instead, offering a connection that required nothing from her but honesty. "If I were to touch you," she said, her voice barely audible, "the connection would be complete. There would be no going back, no way to restore the barriers that have protected me for so long." Jake's eyes held her steadily, and she saw no pressure there, no demand for her to choose. Only understanding and the quiet offer of something she had never allowed herself to imagine. "The choice is yours, Zara," he said, using her name without the formal title for the first time. "But whatever you decide, know that you don't have to carry the weight of your world's spiritual needs alone. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from allowing others to share the burden." The crystal formations around them pulsed with increasing intensity, as if responding to the emotional energy building between them. Zara could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge, the choice that would define not just her future, but potentially the future of both their peoples. Her hand trembled as she slowly raised it toward his, the space between them shrinking with each breath. The vow that had defined her existence for a millennium whispered warnings in her mind, but they seemed distant and hollow compared to the living warmth of connection that Jake offered. When their fingertips finally touched, the world exploded into sensation and possibility. The choice between love and duty. The moment their skin made contact, Zara felt the carefully constructed barriers of 1,000 years crumble like sand castles before a tide. Energy flowed between them with an intensity that made the great crystal itself pale in comparison, and she experienced Jake's consciousness not as an invasion, but as a completion she had never known she needed. Through the connection, she saw his life unfold in brilliant flashes of memory and emotion. A childhood spent gazing at the stars, dreaming of the day humans would walk among them. Years of training and service, driven by an unshakable belief that the universe held wonders beyond imagination. The moment he had first heard of the Valyrians and felt the inexplicable certainty that he needed to be the one to make contact. But more than his memories, she felt his essence, the core of what made him uniquely human, his capacity for hope. In the face of uncertainty, his willingness to risk everything for the chance at something greater, his ability to find connection and meaning even in the darkest circumstances. It was a perspective so different from her own centuries of contemplation that it shattered every assumption she had made about the nature of strength and wisdom. Jake was experiencing his own revelation through their connection. He saw the weight of responsibility she had carried for her entire extended lifetime. the moments of doubt and loneliness she had endured while maintaining her facade of serene detachment. But he also saw the incredible depth of her compassion, the way she had channeled her isolation into a fierce protective love for her people, and the strength it had required to maintain her vow despite the growing emptiness in her heart. "Zara," he whispered, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the very foundations of the sanctum. "I can feel what you've sacrificed, what you've endured. You don't have to carry it alone anymore." The words broke something fundamental within her, and she felt tears streaming down her face as she experienced emotions she had suppressed for centuries. Joy, fear, longing, and above all, love crashed over her in waves that threatened to sweep away everything she thought she knew about herself. "The council will know," she gasped, her hand still connected to his, despite the chaos erupting in her mind. "They will sense the change in the spiritual balance immediately. There will be consequences." Even as she spoke, she could feel the disturbance their connection was creating throughout the sanctum. The crystal formations that had hummed with gentle harmony for millennia were now singing with new frequencies, their resonance shifting to accommodate the dual nature of their combined consciousness. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Jake's grip on her hand tightened, not possessively but supportively, as if he was offering to anchor her against the storm of change. "Then we'll face those consequences together. Whatever comes next, you don't have to face it alone." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the chamber, and Zara felt her heart racing as she recognized the distinctive gait of High Counselor Thane. The elderly Valyrian was one of the most powerful individuals on their world, responsible for maintaining the spiritual traditions that had governed their society for millennia. His arrival now could only mean that the disturbance had been noticed at the highest levels. "High Guardian," Thane's voice carried the weight of centuries. As he entered the chamber, his ancient eyes immediately taking in the scene before him. "The spiritual resonance of the entire sanctum has shifted. The council requires an immediate explanation." Zara slowly turned to face him, her hand still connected to Jake's, despite the impropriety of the gesture. She had expected to feel shame or guilt, but instead found herself filled with a calm certainty that surprised her. The connection with Jake had shown her truths about herself and her world that she could no longer ignore. "High Counselor," she replied, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the crystal formations around them pulse with increased intensity. "I have made a choice that will change everything." Thane's expression remained carefully neutral, but she could see the shock in his eyes as he processed the implications of her words. "The vow you have maintained for 1,000 years is not merely a personal commitment, Zara. It is the foundation upon which our entire spiritual order rests. Surely you understand the magnitude of what you are suggesting." "I understand it better than I ever have before," she replied, gesturing to Jake with her free hand. "Through connection with this human, I have discovered that there are forms of spiritual strength that do not require isolation. Perhaps our traditions, no matter how ancient, are not the only path to enlightenment." The chamber fell silent, except for the crystal formation's new harmonic frequencies, and Zara could feel the weight of history pressing down upon them. Everything that her people had believed about the nature of spiritual power was being challenged. By the simple fact of her connection with Jake, Jake stepped forward, his diplomatic training finally asserting itself despite the profound personal nature of the moment. "High Counselor, I came here as a representative of humanity, seeking alliance and understanding between our peoples. What I found was something far more significant than I had imagined." He paused, his eyes meeting Thane's with steady confidence. "The connection between Zara and myself isn't just personal. It's created a new form of spiritual resonance that could benefit both our civilizations. Perhaps instead of seeing this as a violation of tradition, we should consider it as an evolution of possibility." Thane's ancient features hardened with disapproval. You speak of things you cannot comprehend, young human. The spiritual balance of this world has been maintained for millennia through the sacrifice of our guardians. To suggest that such traditions should be abandoned for the sake of personal gratification is both naive and dangerous. But what if the traditions themselves are what's truly dangerous? Zara interjected, her voice carrying a new authority that made the crystals around them sing with increased intensity. What if our isolation has prevented us from growing, from discovering new forms of spiritual connection that could benefit everyone? She gestured to the crystal formations, which were now pulsing with rhythms that matched the combined beating of her and Jake's hearts. Look at how the crystals are responding to our connection. This isn't destruction of the old ways. It's transformation into something new. Thane's eyes narrowed as he studied the changed resonance patterns, his centuries of experience allowing him to read the energy flows with expert precision. What he saw clearly disturbed him, though whether from fear of change or genuine concern. For their world's stability, Zara could not tell. "The Council will not accept this," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "You have betrayed the most fundamental trust placed in you, and the consequences will be severe. The human must leave immediately, and you must undergo purification rituals to restore the spiritual balance." "No," Zara said, the word carrying such power that the entire chamber trembled in response. "I will not return to the emptiness I have endured for a millennium. I will not deny the truth I have discovered about the nature of connection and spiritual growth." Jake moved to stand beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of conflict. "High Counselor, I understand your concerns about tradition and stability. But sometimes growth requires the courage to embrace change, even when it challenges everything we thought we knew." "The prophecies," Thane said suddenly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The ancient texts speak of a time when the barriers between worlds would fall, when connection would replace isolation as the path to enlightenment." Zara felt her heart skip a beat as she processed the implications of his words. The prophecies were among the most sacred texts in their tradition, considered to be direct revelations from the cosmic forces that governed their world. If their connection was somehow related to those ancient predictions, it would change everything. "The joining of paths," she whispered, the words coming from memories of texts she had studied centuries ago. "The prophecy speaks of a union between distant souls that would herald a new age of spiritual understanding." Thane's expression shifted from disapproval to something approaching awe as he studied the energy patterns flowing between them. The resonance frequencies. They matched the harmonic signatures described in the prophecies. But this was never supposed to happen during our lifetimes. Jake looked between them, his human perspective unable to fully grasp the significance of what they were discussing. "What does this mean for us? For both our peoples?" "It means," Zara said, her voice carrying new confidence as she finally understood the true nature of what they had discovered, "that our connection isn't a betrayal of tradition. It's the fulfillment of it." The revelation transformed the entire nature of their situation. What had seemed like a violation of sacred vows was revealed to be the answer to prophecies that had been waiting for millennia to be fulfilled. The spiritual balance of their world wasn't threatened by their connection. It was enhanced by it. "The Council will need to be informed," Thane said, his voice carrying new respect as he looked at them. "This changes everything about how we understand the nature of spiritual evolution." Over the following days, as word of their connection spread throughout Valyrian society, Jake and Zara found themselves at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond their personal relationship. The crystal formations throughout their world began resonating with new frequencies, creating harmonics that enhanced rather than replaced the traditional spiritual practices. Representatives from Earth arrived to witness the unprecedented cooperation between their species, and Jake found himself serving as both diplomat and bridged between two very different forms of consciousness. The alliance he had originally been sent to negotiate became something far more profound, a joining of civilizations that promised to unlock new possibilities for both. Zara discovered that her newfound connection didn't diminish her spiritual abilities but enhanced them in ways she had never imagined. Through Jake, she could sense the thoughts and emotions of humans across the galaxy, creating a network of understanding that transcended the boundaries between species. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked one evening as they stood together on the sanctum's highest balcony, watching the three suns set over their transformed world. "Giving up the certainty of your old life for the unknown of this new path?" Zara smiled, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight as she considered the question. "I spent 1,000 years believing that isolation was strength, that connection was weakness. But now I understand that true strength comes from the courage to open yourself to others, to risk everything for the chance at something greater." She turned to face him, her hand finding his with the same electric connection they had shared from the beginning. "You showed me that the greatest spiritual power isn't found in solitude, but in the bonds we create with others. You didn't shatter my vow. You helped me understand what it was really meant to accomplish." Jake's arms wrapped around her as they stood together under the alien stars, two souls from different worlds who had found in each other the completion they had both been searching for. Their connection had transformed not just their own lives, but the very nature of how two civilizations understood the possibilities of spiritual growth. "To new beginnings," Jake whispered, his voice carrying the promise of adventures yet to come. "To connections that transcend the stars," Zara replied, and in her voice was the music of crystals singing in harmony, of prophecies fulfilled, and of love that had proven stronger than the weight of 1,000 years of tradition. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility and grounded in the truth that the greatest strength comes not from standing alone, but from having the courage to reach across the void and touch another soul. Asterisk.